So, Schlief,
Yeah.
how are you?
Um, I think, as many people here in Israel, it's a rough time.
So we never officially met before we'll jump in. So if you don't mind, give me like a little your story. How'd you get here? What on Jacob?
So, my name is Gilad. I live in Israel. I'm a musician and a physicist, currently doing my PhD in physics. Uh, I got to Jacob server through Vervaeke's server. Um, and I'm not deeply involved with most of uh, things going on in Jacob's server. When I was 18, I was in Mechina. You can think about it as a gap year program if you're not familiar. So, where it's called the secular yeshiva, where we studied a lot of Talmud and a lot of Jewish philosophy, Bible, and that's where a lot of my connection and knowledge comes from. It's knowledge with a lot of gaps, but definitely it's things that still inspire me and still I find useful to discuss and to gain insight from.
Very nice. And have you found Jacob's Discord fruitful, insightful? You found like it's been like a good place, like a good little watering hole.
Um, in some cases, I find that a lot of the things I see on the server, I rarely get involved. A lot of the things I see on the server feel either kind of over my head, irrelevant to me, or foreign. Uh, in a lot of cases, I kind of feel that it's a place where I can see the way that people that are unlike me think, which I find, uh, well, I find that fruitful in itself, even when I, don't feel that it's nourishing for me. I still feel that it's a part of reality, and reality is something I try to stay connected to, like to at least to be able to look at it uh, uh, with as clear a view as I can.
So I think that that segues nicely into the reason we're having this conversation. Aside from just being nice dudes that like to talk, um, is that Gilad and I uh, were, and I think most of our discussions on Jacob's Discord have been around usually things that more have to do with, let's say, Israel, Zionism, Israel, like I would say less religious focused, more about national and political focused, which is totally fine. I ultimately see a lot of these things interconnected, um, but but uh, so it would be interesting to me if we can map out a little, because you're saying like you're sitting in Israel. I'm also in Israel, obviously, but we're seeing across, looking at this Discord, and we're seeing how someone is thinking in real time. And we're asking, like, it's interesting to me that Shlif is thinking that, because, like, why is he thinking that? And, like, vice versa. You'd be like, why is Chazzy thinking that as well? And ideally, and we could attempt this, obviously, it it's interesting to try and probe, obviously, and see where is someone coming from this. What's his vantage point? What am I not seeing? What am I not understanding? So with regards to, let's say, the Israeli map, and not to get into uh, too many details, where, if you feel comfortable, where would you find yourself? Where would you place yourself?
You mean the political map?
Yeah,
On the left.
on the left. And I, I guess even the left is sort of, and the right. These are very loose terms today, both in the states and over here. So
I
um,
can try to specify more if you want.
sure. So like he feels like self left, let's say center left, would be more avodah left. Would it be more merits left?
So, in terms of who I voted for, its merits.
Mm.
in terms of how I see the political map, I mean, Meretz didn't get in, and Avodah, I guess, somewhat you could say they're left, but I don't think there has been any significant left wing since a few decades. I don't think in the few that have been around have had no influence. Uh, I don't think Gantz is left. I don't think Lapid is left. I don't think there's anything to point to them being like left wing.
And you would categorize these people as center then, because you obviously would say that Lapid is right.
I think they are like the extreme center. I don't think they have principles in any real sense.
I mean, this obviously this is a part of a bigger problem, which is like more of like a leadership problem, which is, I think, and I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, that unfortunately Benjamin Netanyahu, or as we Israelis called Bibi, he seems to be one of the most capable of political leaders Israel has managed to produce. And at least to me, it seems, and from me reading the map, my interpretation of reading the map is many people in Israel would like there to be someone else to vote for, but it seems like there are not many options out there. Do you feel the same way? Do you feel that like it's, as in, I guess I'll explain this. I would be more open to vote left if I felt there was like some sort of rock star leader that would be like, sure, just like show me leadership, show me principles, show me genuine. And I feel like I don't necessarily see that. I don't necessarily see that. And I would say that I think even Bibi is no longer there either anymore. I would say that there was times where there was a different version of him. And I think that's a good example of how you could see power corrupts. I don't necessarily blame him fully. Just you can't imagine what him and his wife think every time they win an election. Like, I don't know, at some point they'll think like they're immortal or something, but it's like a feedback loop that is not very healthy for this country. But do you agree that he really outclasses much of his opponents?
So I agree with quite a few of the points. On one point, which I think is where we agree, is the left, which is what I care about rather than the center. The left has not produced any worthy competition, and being familiar with the people in the political parties, it's not pretty, right? Like the mechanisms within the political parties, the people in there, the work that they do. Even when there were good politicians, and there were times where I could say that the politicians were good, the movement itself, the people deep inside of it were not doing their job. They were very kind of they were dinosaurs, and I think that it's there's a lot of blame that I feel for being a part of the left, that the left has not managed. Right, there's no excuses in the sense that there should have been better leadership, right? There should have been someone of a higher caliber. In terms of whether Bibi outclasses his opponents, it's very hard for me to see it. I hear a lot of people saying that. I think there's a lot of cases historically of people in these political roles that, as the Hebrew saying goes, no grass can grow near them. And it's within the right wing, it's been his focus throughout his political career to make sure that no one can establish himself as his replacement. And it comes to things that are technically even against the law, like not appointing a designated prime minister in case something happens to him, like a replacement prime minister, and many different things. In addition, if you look at things like Netanyahu's recording from the, I think, 2015 campaign, we're talking about how their camp is so driven by hatred. They were talking about how that's the campaign that works. Like when you rile people up and around the hate of the Ashkenazi Jews, around the hate of the elites, that's what wins them elections. And also against Arabs, in the famous one where he said, like, the Arabs are swarming the voting. Right. So I think those things combined, right? Like, it's not just his capability as a politician, but it's also his willingness to go to any lengths. And I think it was Shamir who called him Malach HaBala.
Yeah.
So
there's some personal background in that story as well.
Yeah. But I don't want to get into that, but I'm just saying, like, I don't think that any leader was willing to go to the lengths that Netanyahu has been willing to go to in order to cement his rule.
Well, I would say, first, I also agree with you. I would clarify that when I say he outclasses them, that's not necessarily, it's not necessarily a good thing. It's more of just the facts on the ground in the game we play, which is, like, again, there's internal Israel, and there's, like, our status on the global arena. And there's been many times it says, like, oh, Bibi should just deal with that because he's good at that, but everything, like, has to do with, like, in Israel, like, we need to find someone else. But it's more that it's from the speeches to the English to the political know-how. So it just seems that in a neighborhood such as we live in Israel, it really requires someone that has like a much greater reach and much better understanding of the whole system. I don't think that means that he clearly, and obviously we've seen in October 7th, like this, if you grow too big, you could potentially be blindsided, obviously, from, like, what the true goals are. But I can't see, I'm giving an example of, let's say, a Zahava Galon. I see someone like that crumbling under pressure from external forces. Internally, I don't, and again, it's sad. I just don't think it's someone that's built for that. And I don't know if our system, and we don't have to get too much into the system, I don't think our system is capable necessarily of producing those kind of people.
So I think there's, like, and that may be kind of hones in on the point that I'm trying to make, like that. I think there's corruption that is deep within our system that goes everywhere, and I think that it is characterized by a very large distance between actions and a reality check. And I think when you talk about Zahava Galon, who I think is a decent politician, right, but nowhere near the caliber of leadership that you would expect to come out of the left, considering previous leaders that did come from at least somewhat left, right? So I think when I look at even the party that I voted for, it's been years that it was not a wholehearted vote, in the sense that, like, yeah, they're the lesser evil, right? You can't rile people or rally people up, I mean, around, well, it'll be worse if we elect someone else, right? We have to vote for Meretz because, and that's been their campaign, right? Because, oh no, what would happen if someone else comes into power? And they were, a party that, emphasizes that we need to think long-term and strategically, cannot win by, going to every election and saying, no, urgently, we just need for you to vote for us now. We're not going to talk about any strategic long-term things. We're not going to work at building something that's bigger long-term and expect to maintain that. Like, it was kind of like having a relative on life support, right? They just stayed around, like, and you kind of gotta you owe it to them, but it's temporary. You know that it's just a matter of time till they won't pass the percentage.
Right. So what you're alluding to is something called the Just Not Bibi campaign, right? Which a lot of people basically have, which is like, it doesn't matter who we vote for, we just don't want this guy in again. This is similar in a certain way to Trump, which is because, like, if you paint him as, let's say, the end of the world, and then in reality he's like, but he isn't Hitler though. So like you end up creating, like, obviously there's a very big issue over there. There's, again, to Bibi's credit, his whole move was, we're strong technologically, so we're going to be respected in the region. If we're respected in the region, we could build the peace and we could force the peace on the Palestinians. He's been saying this for a very long time. I'm not getting into whether or not that's right or wrong. It's just like there's a vision with a roadmap and what he wants to do. And that is something that, like you just said, that's something you could sell rather than just like, we do not want Israel to turn into this and we don't want Israel to turn into that. And okay, so zooming in and zooming out for a second by saying that, let's say, well, I'll take a step back just to place myself on the political map. So I don't, like, there's a national Hatzionut Datit, or the national religious group in Israel, that has changed many times throughout many years. And so I would say definitely today I would not see myself as part of that group, even though I see myself as national religious, but that's maybe more of, let's say, a Wikipedia thing that you need to open up, and less has to do with like the political party. I voted for Bibi. I voted for Bennett. I voted for Bennett to be the prime minister at the time as well. I thought Bibi has really lost, has gone. I think he's basically done at this point. I mean, forget everything since October 7th, because that's a separate conversation. But in Israel in the last 9 to 10 months, there has been a lot of tension due to a judicial reform slash what's the word?
Overhaul, coup.
A coup, right? Okay, so these are the two narratives that have been said, and this has galvanized a lot of people. I would even say that one of our earlier interactions was when I was saying that the numbers were not as intense as they were being, and ultimately the numbers did actually grow larger and larger. The numbers are no longer that size anymore, but now it's more about the consistency and less about like the size of like that number. It's just not actually practical to have a percentage of Israel come every single night, but it has clearly been a tremendous show of power on, let's say, that. I wouldn't even say that side, but I would just say in Israel right now, you have this division. I don't know if you'll agree with this characterization, but I would say that many in the right, center, and potentially even some of the left agree or have expressed themselves saying that the judicial system requires tweaking. Okay. And the main issue was, if you get rid of all the dust, was the speed in which this was happening.
No.
Two things. The speed, I'm saying, after the dust settles, I would say it's a speed in which it was happening. It also changes throughout the 10 months period. The amount of changes that were to be had originally, okay, and the intentions of the people behind these reforms that they were doing, right? So if you caught someone and said, like, what about this specific one thing? Someone might be like, that's okay. But if this is the guy behind it, then no. Or if it's this coupled with this, then no. Unfortunately, in Israel, due to social media, which is like another example how like it's extremely powerful and extremely detrimental, where I do think that on both sides there was a complete lack of control at some point of what was being said, what was claimed to being said. And I think a lot of people got lost in the mix, where it seemed like, and I think it's at least the way I saw it, it wasn't fair to characterize this as a coup. On the flip side, and this already has been mentioned many times, the way the right went about it was completely like out of whack. Even at the sense of, even if you wanted to push all these things through, zero prep, like no explanation, no I would argue that much of it would have gone much more smoothly if they would just spend a month explaining what they want to be doing. So I think it was a complete shit show, and exacerbated by the worst fears, let's say, that you would have in anyone in opposition to Bibi. So it really galvanized like the perfect storm sort of to come up over here. However, and I'll let you speak in a moment, it seemed that these tensions were reaching sort of like new heights where like it seemed like there was a true division inside Israel with the people. I don't know about like civil war, but there was a sense where you have people in the army coming out saying outlandish things about like of not volunteering and using like semantics about the way I saw it as like not serving, to people on the right immediately calling these people traitors and enemies, which is also completely insane. And the way I saw it, this crescendoed to me on Yom Kippur. I don't know if you remember the incident that happened on Yom Kippur, which was there were people praying. They wanted to have it they wanted to have separate seating as custom in all Orthodox Judean practices, Orthodox Jewish practices, and they were told not to by the municipality. However, they did have this division of like an Israeli flag, and their prayer was interrupted. It wasn't like too intense, but there was some there was some pushing, and there was a lot of yelling. And the images, you see Jews fighting with Jews on the holiest day of the year, yelling at each other, right? And like a scene was like they were pulling someone's like prayer shawl. Okay. Framing that before I go into the next like weeks, what are your comments, thoughts about what I just articulated?
So regarding the judicial stuff, I think I don't know if you heard Professor I think Yoav Dotan, who was the foremost scholar on the improbability clause, and he spoke about exactly like his claims about it, why the judicial laws were not addressing any of the claims. He was addressing why he went to the committees, and he said, that Rotman had no interest in the actual, matters that needed to be tweaked in the courts, and how and maybe Levine was driven by whatever else, but also didn't have an interest in the same issues that were pointed to. And it's just one example, right? Like, so I just want to add that the issues about whether there should be a reform in the courts in a normal country on a normal day, without all of the subtext that goes with that, is not something that would interest too many people, right? And even when, by the way, it is for a coup, if you don't go ahead and like Yariv Levin, boast about how your plan is to do all of these things, then probably they could have passed it and had control of the courts without anyone noticing and without galvanizing so much resistance. That's just
control of the courts, but rather a more powerful government.
Well, appointing the judges, right? Having control of the appointment of the judges in terms of vetoing any appointment, like never mind. Like that's not really, I think, worth focusing on in this specific part of the discussion. My sense is that Israel's balance of the different powers. What's it called in English? Checks and balances, right?
Checks and balances.
Israel's checks and balances are really out of whack. Like the parliament has no power over the government. The government.
Would you agree though that there's blame to go around everywhere? Or like, do you feel like, because ultimately, like when if like I'm pushing towards, let's say, like a specific point would be, it does seem to me, I just mentioned, like I do not practice as a lawyer, even though I studied law, and I that's like a long time ago. That's really not my world anymore. But it does seem to me that the courts did allow themselves a tremendous amount of interpretation freedom, and obviously they get
Certainly.
right.
I mean,
So
and Dutton talks about it. He talks about the Bagats for the shielding of the southern settlements, and he says that like that's a place clearly where the courts allow themselves too much interpretive freedom. Even if you could say that saved lives, right? He said you should only go for where there is an institutional advantage to the courts. That is, for instance, when professional clerks in ministries make decisions, and the decisions could be made like in a way that it doesn't, like the people themselves don't actually have the capacity to see the whole picture, and they can make something that is completely unreasonable because they don't have the tools. That's where the courts need to interfere. And yes, there were cases in which the courts didn't do that. Again, something that people in the justice system or that are interested in that could be very much interested in, and I would probably not even know about, right, in a normal situation. This wasn't the case for several reasons, and I think one of which is this notion of a politician that's always campaigning, right? The rallying the sort of existential importance around not only making this tweak or something, like it has to be done now, it has to be done in spite of everyone, no one's opinion can be considered, no delays can be had, we're willing to risk our security, as with Gallant's event when he said there is a clear and immediate danger, and there were millions of people on the street, and then not millions, right? I'm sorry. That's
no. My head nod was more about the, again, like the way you're explaining it calmly right now. Ultimately, there's not one news channel that ever got this far, because it's just like everyone is in their camp, which is just like no. And like even when it says like, like.
Can you explain again what I'm not sure I got you. So
what I meant is that you right now came and said, listen, Chazi, I might even agree with you that some of these changes need to happen. And like, there could be people even like in the court systems themselves that would say that. But once you're put on blast, you're like, no. Like once it's turned into them against us, or like they want to do this whole overall, suddenly everyone says like, we're not switching anything right now. And not even if there's going to be like one person from the Knesset inside, like we're not going to accept it. Then you start hearing like insane takes, which clearly don't make any sense. Like there's a member of Knesset, a minister that used to be in the Likud, and he's now in a different party.
Sal?
Yeah, Gideon Sa'ar, right? So like, it's silly that you're in a position right now where you're completely like backtracking the things you clearly said. And you're in that position because like you're locked in this place of like, I'm on this side right now. And we're seeing this obviously across the whole world right now, this tribalism that's kicking in. Now,
and I agree with you that like, if you're talking about news channels, I think the media has betrayed their role in an abysmal and catastrophic manner. And I think, again, this is happening all over the world, but it's my dad was a journalist for 13 years. He left before much of the corruption kind of settled in the way that it has today. He was in Ma'ariv at the time. And so I know like some of the inner workings of
that beast,
journalism world, and on one hand you have this extreme polarization, and by chasing ratings and ignoring the basic requirements of credibility. It's just horrifying, and I think like as anyone who values truth should value good journalism, right? Like it's insanely important, and it's completely neglected. I remember how I was just disgusted when Israel Today first came out, and on their logo they said, not on their logo, like on their I don't know, calling page, like the where they describe what they're meant there
Their
to
mission
do.
statement.
And they were saying, yeah, their mission statement, yeah. They said like we're going to try to tell the truth and correct if we make mistakes. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, no, you don't publish if you're not sure. Like, that's not journalism. If you just and I mean the basics of it is, and I see it now, for instance, with things that might even be coming from Hamas, right? That people are just buying complete misinformation, and by the time someone tells them that it's wrong, like, it's way too late. And journalism has that role. Like, you don't publish if you're not sure. And I mean, and this goes back to your question before, whether there's blame to go around, which I want to take more generally than regarding the courts. Yes, but it's a bit of a cheap out to kind of use that and stop there, right? There are places where more blame needs to be attributed, and places where less blame needs to go, and
Sure.
Everyone needs to reform, right? But when you have journalists that there are extreme cases on many platforms. We have journalists that are just completely and intentionally warping the reality in order to serve their purposes. That's completely off. We have journalists which are actually just messengers of a politician, go into the studios and just read out what they were told to say. That is 5 levels worse, right? Like, that is, I mean, both of them are bad, but the second one is so, deeply seated within the institution. Like, you can't untangle it as much as just some journalists being biased and promoting their ideals, right? So I feel like, to me at least, those things are unbearable.
I would agree with you, and now if we could dig a little deeper for a moment before as we move across this timeline. So then there's a question, which is, because if generally we're saying, like, there's blames to go around, maybe more here, less over there, but at some point this tension moved from the judicial reform, which was just basically a placeholder, into what I think was Jewish or Democratic. And I thought that was like, I don't want to say that's the only thing, but that was definitely a main characteristic sort of undergirding a lot of this sort of argument, which is, and by Jewish and Democratic, I don't mean one or the other. I'm just talking about some sort of blend. And then I guess obviously we'll have to see where you and I fall out on this map. But generally speaking, and I think it was like a shot in the foot on the quote unquote left side to, jump on the Declaration of Independence. The reason this was brought into the mess was because it was used in a court case to look at it as if, does it have like legal binding? And the attitude was like, it's very special, but like ultimately it's not like a legal document. And the left jumped on that and said, like, well, what are you talking about? It's like it's the most important thing. I don't think they realize that, like, in it talks about, like, the prophets, who Israel is, like, all this ends up sort of bringing us back to this loop, which is, do you see yourself? I'm asking you, and I'm asking myself, and my answer to this is, do you see yourself as the citizen of the world, and I am just like Sweden of the Middle East, and it's just like a democratic state called Israel? Or is that I am the Jewish people back in my homeland, and I am expressing myself nationally through the game called the democratic process, because that is what countries are doing today, and that is how I am. And being part of the Western world, that is how I interact with the other nations. However, that is not my goal. My goal is not to be cosmopolitan and to be a Democrat. My goal is to be a Jewish citizen, and we can unpack that in a moment with what with the history that it comes with. So I would say, given that question, where would you place yourself that way?
I don't think I have a clear-cut answer.
Okay, which is obviously, which is totally fine. But
I would say I'm not sure if that's the question that I see arising most powerfully from that discussion, and it's a similar question maybe, but I think for the left it is still very important that there is a Zionist element there. Like, you want this is the country for the Jewish people. It was formed in that regard, and even those who say like it needs to be a democratic country, I don't think that there are many. I don't think it's a representative statement to say like that they're looking to be cosmopolitan citizens and sort of just so I'll just specify why.
For sure.
And because when you look at what the left is talking about, like what is really concerning the left is we don't want to annex the territories because we don't want to have an equal amount or even a majority of non-Jewish citizens as many as Jewish citizens, and we don't want to transfer all of these people to somewhere else in some sort of, I don't know, hallucination by insane people that think that sort of thing is possible, moral, or justifiable, and we certainly don't want to commit crimes against humanity or in any of those things. So I think that essence of saying like, no, this is something else. We need to be democratic. We have citizens that live here that are a part of the society here that are non-Jews, but we don't want this to become just another country that Jews happen to live in. This needs to somehow be preserved. And I think the manner in which it's preserved is different. And the importance that people see in democracy, I think, goes beyond just like we're playing this game with the world, but rather to say a liberal democracy is a way in which Judaism in different forms can exist. And Professor Avi Sagi, who is also from the religious Zionism movement and does not relate with it today at all, talks about the fact that like the concept of the halakha state, right, is abysmal. Like it's terrible for Judaism, and it would not allow different groups to live out their religious lives in here. So that's where I see that's where I see myself, right? The democratic part is important, but it is important because it serves this idea of this place and its unique role.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. Let's try to dig a little deeper. So first off, I am a very big believer that the democratic process ultimately is still being like a earthly tool is supposed to be elevated. And I, as a religious Jew, my operating system is Judaism. And so when I'm looking at the Bible and it says that God says, if you come to your land and you look around you and you see that other nations have kings, you could give a king, you could appoint a king basically. And the sense is over here, which is, it's not necessarily, I don't think God is saying king as in monarchy, as in when you look around you and you'll see the political systems that are around you, right? Even quote unquote being the the chosen people doesn't mean that you have the answers for everything. You should go around and see how do people sharpen swords, and these are the systems that work well. So when I say I'm part of the game, I'm saying I'm very much interested, and I think Judaism needs that as a vessel. I should mention, because we're on Jacob's channel, that like I know he's not pro, Zionism. So putting that aside, I am a believer of that Theodor Herzl and the Zionistic movement and where we are today. These are all elements and expressions of biblical prophecies ultimately. So to me, again, I have no problem bringing these things in to my system and saying, and of course, the rule of law and all these things that we need. When I hear Medinat Halacha, religious state, I think it's a little of a red herring when people think of like, well, does that mean like we're killing people that like are driving on the Sabbath, or does that like stoning them, or does that mean that now people don't have rights to vote? So I disagree with that interpretation, and I think Israel today already is at like an 80% version of what I would call a religious state. The fact that the language is Hebrew, that was a conscious decision of the people over here to bring up. The fact that the Sabbath is our day off. And there's many other different versions of that this is built into the system. Judaism in general is not interested in what you're doing in your private life. There would be a question, what is happening publicly, for example, right? So obviously there are some changes, but I don't see them needing to be coerced. So for example, do I believe, and this is like jumping to an extreme, but just to put things in context, do I believe that we should be doing what we can for the third temple to be built? Yes. However, the only way I could see me participating in that if everyone in Israel decided and the government decided to do that. But for that to happen, you're talking about a miraculous time where everyone decided together that like, this is what makes sense. So I don't think as a people, and I don't think as a nation, we're interested in doing that. And that's why I don't think that's something that could happen. But I think that's something that could be galvanized within the people. And then the question is, what is it that are we trying to do? Now, and I'll bring this back to your question. We say there's some people that want to keep like, the Zionistic element. I don't like that term, obviously is a very complicated term. But when I'm thinking about the Declaration of Independence am I a continuation of that biblical story? In 1948, does the Bible come alive, right? Because for Christians and Muslims and Arabs in the world, that's what they see. They're saying like, why is the Bible coming back to life in 1948 again? These guys were gone. And then there's internally, what are we expecting from ourselves? Because we build this amazing nation and it's 75 years and like it's an oasis and a startup nation, but I'm not here to sell the discount key. I'm here to sell like the message of the Jewish people. And to me, when I see, and I gave the example of the Yom Kippur, when I see there's a sense of that, like, this is not what you should be doing over here, or this to me is an offense. And I'll use also, using what's the word I'm looking for right now, but I'm forgetting the word. But I'm giving this example where at this prayer that was happening outside, there was a woman that got up with a pride flag and she was waving it around. And in a sense, I didn't have an issue with the pride flag, but for me, that flag was telling the religious people over there, you go in the closet. Hide this. Don't have this on the street. And that was to me like a whole thing from like, okay, you're asking me to accept, we're in a new world right now. Okay, sure. More rights. Okay, no problem. And LGBTQ. Okay, no problem. But I want to do what I've been doing for 3,000 years. No, don't do that publicly. And to me, that was like that, in a certain sense, was the message was like, yeah, we want to be Jewish, but like in our terms and how it's seen by what the Western world is sort of dictating. And again, I understand that that's a game I want to be participating in, but that's not the only game I'm playing. And there's a larger game that I'm playing right now. Part of that game I'm playing relates to what I see happening on October 7th, which is it doesn't matter that the people there on the wall in the border are left-wing and bring the Gazans to the hospital and pay their money. When there's a chance, there is someone out to get the Jew. They don't know who you voted for, and they don't care about the reform. They wanted.
Well, they also killed everyone else they could find. Bedouins, Arabs.
Sure.
They didn't just come to get the Jew.
Do you think in Hamas's charter about destroying Israel, that's not about the Jew?
It definitely is. I'm just saying in these specific terror attacks.
They also killed Bedouins, of course, and it's horrible. These are our citizens. Obviously, it's devastating. But the sense was that this has been going on for thousands of years, and this is part of a larger story. And are we willing to admit that about ourselves, or are we just another group? Because if we're just another group, then we're for sure occupying. It's not very hot over here. Leave. There is nothing to do here. But and that doesn't mean that if you think the other way, that like, oh, you're allowed to occupy. But I'm just saying, if you're not here because of the prophets, then why are you like? And I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to an agenda of like, then why are you here? It's not that great. It's just not like such a. It's and the tension comes in because the Bible stresses the fact so many times, stresses the fact that we are going to have to live with the concept of the ger, the non-Jew that lives amongst us. It's mentioned so many times, and that's a tension that the Bible is telling you are always going to have to deal with this tension. On the flip side, there's nothing more biblical than Hebron and all those spaces that they talk about, because that's where the magic, quote unquote, happened. That's where he met. That's where he went. That's where he did. So this is a tension obviously Israel has to figure out. And what I tell people is like, I would be fine. Israel has done many peace deals, offered many times, through different prime ministers and different governments, different peace deals, and they were denied. But I'll go more than that. Take the whole Western Wall. You could have, it's all yours. Okay? Take all Judah and Samaria. It's all yours. I just don't want anyone dying. But if you can't promise that, it's just not worth it. Because the game we're playing over here, like there could be an Arab prime minister. I work with Arabs. I see Arabs. It's sad because ultimately Palestinians and Arabs are our cousins. And ultimately, religiously, I believe that both Christians and Arabs and Jews are supposed to ultimately find their way to be together. But you are dealing with the fact that this is the theological conversation that's happening. It's not just about land swaps and having a conversation about like, oh, but it's fair and it's not proportionate and it is proportionate. It's a question of...
I mean, I'm sorry to cut you off. It's just
sure. I'm ranting.
You've been saying a lot of things, and I feel like you're speaking to an image of me. Like
I'm not even talking to you. I'm talking about to an idea.
If we're talking, let's talk to each other. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, sorry. So when I'm talking to you, then I'll bring it closer to you, which is when you say if you're interested in a Jewish state, right? What does that mean to you? That is Jewish. Is it culturally Jewish? Or is that where it ends? That like it happened? Like, why is it this land? What makes this land special?
So, again, I think the answer is complex, right? I think that there are ways in which Judaism, in all of its different historical incarnations, is alive in me. And the fact that I'm living here is a part of that. I'm living in a country that speaks Hebrew. I'm living, there is a lot to have. Now, if I say like what view of Judaism I sort of ascribe to, then I relate to what we were doing in the secular yeshiva, right? Which means here's a treasure trove of really just some of the most brilliant and fascinating texts that you can have access to, and that when you read them, you see that they show up in your culture all the time, right? Study them, don't turn away. But unlike, let's say, Reform Judaism, which is very eisegetic, right? They want to interpret the writings in a way that fits more modern life. We see, like, okay, let's first of all see what, like, exegetically, what did they mean? What does this text mean? But to have the ability to say, I don't want that, right? There are things in, for instance, Talmud, and I don't remember which Masechet it is. I think Sotah, where they have this. They talk about this ritual that you're supposed to do to a woman that is that her husband suspects of being unfaithful.
Allegedly, she's been cheating on him, right? Yes, yes.
Yeah, and they say even if he is he's lost it and she has no fault and there's no evidence, she still has to go through the thing in order to move down. And to read it, to understand it, to look at this thing, which is definitely unpalatable, right, to people nowadays, and to say, okay, but that is a part of this baggage that we carry. This is a part of our culture, and we choose to not take that into our lives now. And that's the choice. That's the way that I relate to Judaism. And like that is the view that I would say, if you want more people to engage in separate seating on Yom Kippur, right? Great, and if you can convince them, if you can, do it in a peaceful manner, and they want to do it, sure. Like the only aspect that I think makes it more critical to have that separation, right? That Leibowitz talked about, like the religion needs to be separate from the state, not just because it would corrupt the state, but that the state would corrupt religion. Like the Religious Act, and Rambam talks about it as well. Like there is a much lesser value to it when it's coerced, when it's done, for some other reason rather than for itself. So that's how I ascribe to it. And like I said, I find a lot of value in it, and I want to engage with it, but I would not want that to become something that is imposed on me.
So I think that's you articulated that very well, because I should clarify. In Israel, unfortunately, the parties that represent Orthodox Judaism are mostly ultra-Orthodox Judaism, and they wield a tremendous amount of political power. And due to this, I would say that many Israelis' interpretation and understanding of Judaism, unfortunately, is seen through that lens. That's what they're seeing as, and obviously from an anti-Semitic point of view, like, drawing the classic Jew with, like, that's what they see. Now, I am a big believer of, let's say, quotes like the Talmud by Rabbi Kook. The Talmud is the great Band-Aid of the exile, right? That this is not like, this was a default. This isn't the ideal system. It's just a system we had because we're in exile. And I use the term of, like, we have to shed the exoskeleton of exile, and we have to move from the Torah of exile and even the Torah of Moses to the Torah of Messiah and the Torah of redemption. And that Torah, and obviously there's sages that allude to these, but that looks different, right? It could look that it's potentially more permissive in certain senses and potentially more restrictive in other senses. However, there is a verse in Jeremiah about how God will come and redeem the Israelite once again, but he says it's going to be different than when I did it when it was in Egypt, when I had to hold his hand, and that is alluding to God coercing, as in he had to pull us to do it, to when this happens the next time, where it's going to be embodied inside them, as in it's going to be pure coming in from them because they want this. So I get to this tension again where we are today, which is I would agree completely with you that the model that is being sold in Israel is a bad model, is a faulty model. It's an exile model. And because of its, obviously legally, but that's just the game, the way the game is set, the amount of political power they have that ultimately brings to policy being forced down some people's throat, right? And you're saying, and that's being coercive to me. I'm with you. And because of that, I would say there's a sense where, because I would argue after 2,000 years of exile, the fact that like a Jew is praying on the streets, it doesn't matter whether he's doing it separately or not. Like it should just be celebrated, because like if you showed that to any Jew in the history of the Jewish people in diaspora, they would be like, these are the end days. This is amazing. Now I can understand that the girl that interrupted that is feeling that this is representative of like, and next thing they're going to tell me that in my daughter's school, they also have to be separate as well. And I don't want that. And obviously that comes from like a lot of fear mongering, but is their interest, and I'm talking to you now specifically, how much of the population, right, is you, which is, yes, I'm interested in my treasure trove. I'm just not interested in how it's being, how the Rabbanut HaRashit articulates that or embodies that. Now I can tell you again from a meta perspective, the fact that in 2023, after 2,000 years, we have something called the Chief Rabbinate is a miracle. From a micro perspective, it's a completely corrupt system and it's horrible, right? So we have to deal with two of those tensions. But I feel like there's a sense on the left, and I don't know if this is true about, or I'll ask it differently. What do you think? What do you need to see more of to feel like I want to be connecting, or the people around me want to be connecting more to this Judaism, or more to their, and it not just being the fact that we speak Hebrew and they know some verses from the Bible. Rather, why is Jordan Peterson coming to Israel and having Israelis, 3,000 Israelis come pay $150 to watch him, when all he's saying is what every rabbi says in their synagogue? Like, what is it? They're like, give it to us.
First of all, that surprised me when I watched Jordan Peterson as well. I mean, I think for anyone who has, I don't know, some real background in Judaism, you don't want Jordan Peterson to see innovation. You watch it and see, feel kind of, I don't know, at home, nostalgia. Like that's what we do, right? Like that's a thing that's very familiar when you watch like the biblical series.
By the way, you can,
and he doesn't do it as well as them, right? Like by far, I think. I've heard much more fascinating interpretations by rabbis than anything Jordan Peterson had done. I would say the answer is much simpler, and I'll give you like the story. That the interactions of most people I know, not even just from the left, but people who are generally secular with religious Jews are very negative, because it's the chief rabbinate and it's what's the name of it's Zaka, from when someone died.
Hevra Kadisha.
Hevra Kadisha, right. And the story I heard from
Hevra Kadisha are the people, the organization that oversees dealing basically with the deceased.
Yeah. So what they encounter, and I heard this story from a friend, and I think it is representative. His grandfather who lived with him and his mother had passed away, Niftal, and he tried to get burial and stuff, and they were completely insensitive, obnoxious. Basically, he's a captive customer, so they could squeeze whatever they could out of him in the most cynical manner they could. Then he goes to a printing press to print out mourning notices.
Obituary.
Yeah. Isn't obituary the thing you read during the funeral?
That's a eulogy.
Oh, eulogy. All right. So the obituary. So he goes to print out the obituaries. Secular guy, working there, and he says, "No, this I'll do for free, right? I don't take money for these, I'll make my money elsewhere, but obituaries I'll do for free, right? And I think that's the core reason why you don't see, like, why you have this animosity. And I've met a lot of great, amazing people who are religious, and I've had beautiful and enlightening conversations with them. But when you come against the institutions of religion, that's what you see. You see, I think, the worst of those people, right? You see the so that's what I think is like, and maybe it's not big picture enough, but I think that's what drives it. Like, the interactions are so negative, are so contentious. There is so much, I don't know. Yeah,
Just
that's what
to
I think.
explain a little to our viewers, it's contentious because, for example, dealing with the deceased, they'll come and say that only the men could be there and the women can't be there, or they'll say that the women can't speak, or they want to have a traditional burial, or when it comes to marriage, if you're a divorcee, you can't marry a priest, or if you, for example, my brother married a Russian. So it was just a lot of, proving that she's Jewish. Like, yes, she's Jewish. She's Jewish enough to live in the state. Is she Jewish enough to marry you? Now, at the same side, obviously, like flipping the corner, like we're flipping this other side of the coin. Like, do you think on, let's say, the secular side, is there, but like they sort of, that's their interaction with it. And they're like, wow, Judaism sucks. But why not open up a book and be like, well, who says that's how Judaism has to be acting? Like, why is it then like there's like a dump of like, then the treasure trove? It's almost like, yeah, that's like a nice little idea, but it's not practical. But like mindfulness is stemming from there. If you want to go like the mystic route, you could go through like there's, like you just said, there's so much there that you could be playing with and you could be building with. It's like the UN is writing your verses on their wall, right? Ironically, then bashing you, but like that's the game that the people are doing. So is there no is and it seems to me that there's no desire. Let me go about this the other way around. A problem in Israel is that the ultra Orthodox community, due to historical reasons, have received some sort of exempt from the army. And because of this, they also multiply and have their birth rate is significantly higher than the average. I mean, obviously Jewish are higher than the global average and ultra-Orthodox are higher than the average Jew. But this obviously changes the political map because they vote generally as a group. And because of that, they wield a tremendous amount of political power, which allows these growing group to basically live off some sort of welfare situation and not participate in the society in the same way as the other civilians. Just to mention, obviously you have the same issue with the Israeli Arabs because they don't serve in the army as well for other reasons, obviously. And to be fair, that the ultra-Orthodox community does do a tremendous amount of volunteer work in other different versions in Israeli society, which does obviously help the Israeli society as well. But generally speaking, they're not serving the army.
I'm just not sure that's like, I think it's hate mongering that you see a lot, which is ironic because I think a lot of it is anti-Semitic, essentially. But almost every leftist I talk to doesn't have the core problem isn't the Haredi people, the ultra Orthodox. I think the current government definitely is, and I think the fact, if we go to the present day, that coalitional money is still being funneled to the different I don't know, extortionist parties in the government is, I don't know, it's beyond belief at this point, like the level of cynicism is going around during even this war.
Correct.
Like,
Definitely with the backdrop of this war, which you'd seem like would be enough of a reason to
yeah,
which is sort of where I'm taking this to see, like, is this a snap out moment? And the reason I mention that is because I did see, I mean, let's say today they reported about like 2,000 ultra Orthodox soldiers that decided to, ask to enlist. And
so I just want to add a little anecdote. Is when I was in the army, I was a programmer and I was a teacher in the programming course. One of the courses I taught was basic math and then also programming for Haredi people. Right? That it's not. I know that they enlist.
no, but
For a
it's
while
not. It's
now,
not.
like it's not in those amounts. I know, and there's a lot of issues around that. What I'm trying to say is, like, it's not that this is clear cut or that these interactions, don't happen and they're locked in their world. And I think it's also not so clear to say that their leaders represent all of the different currents within the ultra orthodox communities. Like it's such a multi-layered society. So like it's very hard to speak of it like that.
Yes, but there are things that they act like a monolith about, like, they're all gonna. But I guess I also, when I was in the army, I oversaw this group called Shachar Kahol, Blue Dawn, about bringing in like ultra Orthodox people into the army, into the Air Force. So yes, there's always those groups. What I'm looking for now is, does something as devastating as what happened right now, the war we're talking about, October 7th, and I mentioned devastating not only because, like, obviously Israel can best its enemies. It's not like we were nervous about that all of Israel is going to get run over. But was this a wake-up call to our ultra Orthodox brothers to recognize this magic thing called Israel only works when everyone is invested in it? At the same time, can the left see that the people learning is why we're also here, though? Like, that was the chain, that discussion that they're talking about, not because their learning brought us here, but rather that was the alive chain of that way of life, understanding, and keep that going all the way for 2,000 years till we're coming back over here. And that doesn't mean that they all need to be learning, but an example of that was, and I told you it's like a data point, that the restaurants, the non-kosher restaurants made themselves kosher so they could bring kosher food to the front lines. That to me is each one seeing each other and recognizing the need of working together and respecting each other in that manner. And
there's a few points. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Sure.
So one thing I wanted to ask, and remember that later, is like, if we just, I'm genuinely curious, and I'm not trying to push it to a corner. If we just accept that they're doing their thing, and I can, maybe I can be on your side, and maybe I would have different thoughts about it, but generally, I wouldn't expect the left to suddenly become very entranced with the story of the of the prophets and everything. But I think, like, can we get along with an agreement that they can do their thing and their what they believe is a part of it, and we won't get into that and bother them, but maybe there's a question of how many resources the country should invest in that. That's one thing. And the other thing with the restaurants, and it goes back to what I was saying, like Hachim restaurant, which sent so much food to the front lines. They had spoken about it. Like their imperative was just how fast can we get it there with as little problems as possible. And they tried to just send food, which rabbis have given halacha, saying it's war, you can eat treifa, it's fine, and still the chief rabbinate put obstacles in their way, and they just said, whatever, we'll just make it kosher just so that we can get the stuff there. So I'm not sure if I can look at that as like each side seeing each other in that specific example, right? It was still coercion, and one side was saying like,
it wasn't coercion. They didn't have to do it.
In this case, because they had a higher value, right, which was expediency, right? They just said, we don't care about that it's kosher. We don't think we should make it kosher. The people themselves said, like, we'll see what happens after the war, but we're definitely not changing ourselves to now be a kosher restaurant or anything. In that sense, like, you have this higher value, and they're telling you, well, you have to make it kosher in order to get whatever. I'll make it kosher. That I wouldn't.
I hear what you're saying about that specific topic example, and I also sent Yosef these halachic war guidelines that the Rabbanut sent out, and it was very lenient as one should be when it's war. But Yosef and I were saying that it's sad that they sort of need to do this because people are not, like, it's almost not obvious that, of course, like, if someone's going to shoot at me, it's okay for me to use my cell phone on the Sabbath because, like, I'm right. So that also has to do with the fact that we're very ignorant, basically, about like our own tradition in a certain extent. I still look at that story. Like, I hear you're saying, like, here specifically, no, Chazi, like they were making an obstacle. You could look at it and saying, potentially, specifically that case of the Rabbanut, they were making an obstacle. But I could see it in the same light with saying that, because I know this from, let's say, these are anecdotal, but from the stories on the front line, that this is also what many of these soldiers want as well. They want to be able to eat this food. And from the conversations I've been having, I was seeing it more as a response to them and less as a response of, like, because I was forced to do so. Now, I understand what you're saying, that, like, that would be an example where I'm forced to do this. I would argue that this seeing of each other, and, like, to that question you asked earlier, I hold, according to the Maimonides view, that, like, not only, like, Maimonides doesn't believe in the system that the ultra Orthodox have in Israel. You must be learning, you must be studying. So it's not even, this is really a specific model that we've never seen before. We've also never had a state before. So you're really just seeing, like, exile, like, embodied again, like, through a political system, which is why it's extremely not healthy. And they're aware of that as well. When you say, like, what if we let the other guys do their thing? But, like, we need to have people involved more. So obviously they need to be involved more, because I want them to they'll feel more involved when they feel like this is my state. And this is, like, we're doing this together. I feel like they still feel, definitely the ultra Orthodox, we are in a secular state that we're just, like, we're just buying time until, like, we could have our theological coup, or we could, or God descends down from the heavens. I'm more interested in seeing from the left, if there's interest to push to, we would like more of a religious component, just not that one, not yours. And
you mean we would like more personally, or we would like more at the state level?
Well, you could argue how that manifests on the state level, but I would even say on the state level, and that's sort of where is it a Jewish state that acts democratically, or is it a democratic state that has Jewish components? And I go by the former. So I can see Jewish elements being represented even through policy. You could argue that it would be the most lenient policy. It would be one that comes, there's different interpretations of it. But, like, I don't think it ends with, like, just do your thing and let us do our thing, because I believe that the ultra Orthodox thing is ultimately everyone's thing. They're just doing it in a way that's not invitive and, like, not inclusive, and you're not involved in it. But the same system that you went through, I would think every kid in Israel would want to partake in, because that's your treasure trove.
I would be happy, to see more kids involved in that, and to see more adults involved in reading the Talmud and reading, past just high school Bible studies, right? And and also, reading just also connections, right? Reading Aristotle to understand the Rambam, that
Of course.
there's all of those things are critical, and I think they could benefit, like that is a part of why religion or philosophy, and in Eastern traditions they're not separate things, um, they're about the most fundamental things, and there's no person to which that's not relevant, right? You have to contend with the most existential questions, and I think it's
But aren't
it's
we an
bad that they're
existential
not.
question?
What?
Isn't Israel an existential question? Like
Yeah,
America
yeah.
doesn't wake up in
I'll
the
get to the
morning.
point. I'll get to the point. All right. My view politically, and we can be, in disagreement on that, is that the best way, if you want people to engage with Judaism, is to have as little of that happening in the coercive state level, to allow for, people to have their way of life and their beliefs, and I think that John Vervaeke, he talks about it in the lecture, like the relation between truth and relevance, right? And he says, if you want, he didn't say that, but I'll paraphrase. If you want to reach people, if you want your message to get through, and even that relates to politics as well, you don't only need to have the truth. You also need to have relevance. It also has to be existentially important to other people. It has to reach them. And I think that a lot of what puts these barriers between people is that focus, like, no, we have it right, but that's not enough. Like, if you want to really have it right, and in Judaism we know that we can be wrong, right? We can have machloket l'shem shamayim, and you need to have people engage with you. Otherwise, like, if you think you have the truth, right, and you're very convinced of that, but let's say you're an obnoxious person, then and you say, well, no one is capable of refuting me, therefore I'm right, then you're like a fighter that just sprays themselves in skunk smell and stands in the middle of the ring and says, I'm the champion because no one wants to step in the ring, right? So I would love to, for anyone I know to have interactions with the amazing religious people that I've had, and even singing nigunim, which most secular people don't even know about, right? And those were powerful experiences. And I can say that if that person had a coercive element to the way he was teaching, and wanted to kind of make me an image of what he thinks I should be, I would not have been able to really gain as much depth, insight as I was able to normally. So that's how I see that, and I don't think it's a pipe dream, especially considering, right, the miraculous reality that the Jews are now in Israel, right? Like, miracles, like things that were unbelievable, like that we could not believe have happened. Are we going to stop, at the level, at that, small step, that people can, out of their own free will, engage with that when you don't coerce them in any way?
So again, I'm going back to that verse about, like, holding by the hand and coming about it from your own sense. There's a sense of, first of all, historically speaking, at this point, I'm just agreeing with something you said earlier about, let's say, each one is sort of in its own zone. Historically speaking, there's always been a division between the house of Judah and the house of Israel. And I've spoken about this in the past on this channel about, like, the ideas of Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. But there's definitely and the lineage of Ephraim was always more secular. And there's even a sense where I think it's hard for ultra-Orthodox people to recognize this today, which is there a version of the secular Jew, which does basically like, is there a spectrum, right? Like not everyone has to be the most pious man. However, I would argue that while there's many in Israel, like, you know, you telling me that you were in Mechina makes you more knowledgeable about Jewish studies than like most Jews were in history, because like they didn't know how to read. That, like, you know, so at some point, it's in a certain sense like we're at a very high level, because like we're all very knowledgeable at that end. On the other hand, there's a lot of ignorance, and like there's a lot of like when I see that woman, like I give that example of like standing on top of that stage with that flag. To me, it's like it's a horrible offense, and not because like, oh, like there's an issue with like gay rights. Like it's nothing to do with that at all. It's more about like what your values were and how you what your priorities are, basically, in your hierarchy of values and how you see these things. So I think it's not something new, and there's a sense even when the soldiers of Israel go to the people of Jerusalem that are represented by Judah and say, pray to your God for us, as in like, you guys are the religious ones, so like do your praying for, we're going to go out to battle because like we're the swords. Now, obviously, again, we can't, at some point, and this is where it gets attention, there's a Talmud portion that talks about how King Yerovam, who comes from the lineage of Ephraim, is a very bad king. God tells him, come and you'll stroll in heaven with me and the son of Jesse together. And Yerovam asks him, who's walking first? And he tells him it's the son of Jesse. So Yerovam says, no, I'm not interested. And there's a sense, to me, that is, again, the conversation of the democratic and the Jewish, which there's like, we first have to feel comfortable in our own skin. And I understand that could be like, well, I'm only going to be comfortable calling myself like first Jew when I know it's not represented like how the Rabbanut sees it. And I totally accept that. So much so where I think that, you know, marriage, there should be civil marriages in Israel, which I believe that the majority of Israelis want to get married through the religious process if they're not coerced to do so. And the same thing, like there is no law to fast or not drive on Yom Kippur, but most of the country does. And that's why it was a huge mistake when they did, which brought us to the last round of elections, which had to do with the law of chametz, of not having bread on Passover. And they wanted to make that into a law, even though basically that was understood that most people respect each other. So I think that is an example of the difference between hand holding and have it come naturally, sort of ground up. The question is because the rhetoric I hear usually is not, that's not my Judaism. It's like, I don't hear like the refute that you're saying right now, like, well, Chazi, that's not like, you know, my experience. It's, I hear them saying, I don't want any of that. Don't give me any of this. Like, I don't want any of it.
Berl Katzenelson, one of the pioneer movement, like said, we wanted to raise a generation of Epicurists, or like heretics, let's say, in translation, and we raised instead a generation of ignoramuses. Right, and that's the case. Like, if you're,
or the Achad Am Bialik version.
What?
I'm saying it's like an Achad Am Bialik interpretation of how they see like the modern Jew, or let's say Micha Goodman talks about how we should adopt the version of, let's say, the Sephardic Jew, which there's a traditional Jew, there's a more Orthodox Jew, but it's a spectrum. And with like European Jewry, there's a much bigger division between Kodesh and Chol, and mundane and holy. And basically, like, they're in like a live example of this is, you'll see the Sephardic mother praying in the synagogue, but she has like a shirt on that's very tight that says on it like sexy mama and glamour. I don't know if she could even read the sentence, but to her, there isn't a division of that. She's here praying right now and she's being super holy. And you'll have in the Ashkenazi or the European movement, it's more like there aren't those two things. You can't be wearing that shirt and be praying like this. So there's a sense that, like, if Israel could adopt a more like a spectrum sort of understanding, like in English, there's a term called, you're off the derech, you're off the path. So you're no longer Orthodox. And I like believing that the path is extremely wide. It's very, very, very hard to get pushed off that path. So I guess to wrap it up in a certain sense, do you feel that, because I feel that this war that just happened is happening, is like, I don't think Israel's ever going to be the same after this moment. Being an optimist, I want to believe that my son is now growing up to like a new version of Israel, which is in a certain sense like more patriotic, more connected to the land, but in another sense, more rooted and more realizing that like this is where I'm supposed to be. This is my home. And do you feel that this will lead, and obviously it depends if the government doesn't completely screw it up and all these things, but do you think that this is a chance for Israel to find unity, or do you feel like there's darker days ahead?
So this is, I think, the crux of the conversation, is interesting as it has been so far. There's a lot to be hopeful about, and there's a lot to despair from. And I feel like, thinking of Rabbi Nachman, I must not despair. But I can't say it's easy, right, not to despair. And this goes into politics more, and I think where we might be more in disagreement. So my own experience of this whole period of time, especially, let's start from after the war, but it goes back before that. The complete corruption of everything that we hold dear, like the process, right? I'm not saying it has been corrupted irreparably, but the process of basically taking everything in the country and trying to tear it apart. And at this point, it just feels, or I wouldn't say feels, like the facts are the facts. The government is not functioning. The people and the different ministries are completely political assignments, and they are not qualified for their jobs, and they are not doing their jobs. The disaster
left. I said one thankfully left, Galit Distal, and the Hasbara, ministry closed down because it was a waste of money and time.
Yeah, and even as the war started, she goes on television, and she's asked, "Do you see yourselves as the government as responsible?" And she says, "Well, this news anchor Dani Kushmaro once said that Tzahal isn't strong, so he has some responsibility." And he said, "Okay, that's responsible." No, there's also this guy who said something, and the common factor, or the most, I think, fundamental explanation I can say for the behavior of this government, or of this, I think it's not just this. There's a whole phenomenon of this in Israel, right? Where, speaking in Socratic terms, it's the sanctification of appearance over everything else. Like, it doesn't matter what reality is, as long as we make it appear the way we want it to appear.
I should just mention that, but that has to go hand in hand with the rise of social media, and how
this is definitely,
they're being forced into this, which doesn't mean they should be just much stronger leaders, but this is the reality we're living in right now.
No doubt that this is a social media phenomenon. I do think when you look at history, you do see examples of it. And Yair Golan talked about the processes going on in Israeli society some years ago, and that cost him not being the Ramatkal, the chief of the army. I've spoken to a woman from the religious Zionism in one of the marches to Jerusalem and the protests, and she had said, that first of all, they're still on the same side. Like the fact that they're opposing this judicial reform doesn't mean that they're on a different political side. And then that when she speaks to other people in her group, like there can be discussion, there can be disagreements, but the people who watch Channel 14, she said, unreachable, right? They are in a world of their own, and they cannot be reasoned with. Her experience, and then she tells me, this religious Zionist, on the other side of the spectrum, she tells me, now I understand what Germany 1933 was like, right? To see that level of, the corruption of our sense-making mechanism. And I don't know whether that analogy is apt or not. It's what she had said at the time. But I think it comes to demonstrate the experience, like this helplessness and utter frustration. You're trying to get to any sort of ground level where you say, at least here we have to be on the same page. Like there have been thousands of murder. There are hundreds abducted in Gaza. Surely you won't play political games now. Surely you would appoint the most worthy person to deal with bringing those people home. And they don't, right? The level of I don't know how to describe this feeling, right? The helplessness and frustration and rage at that complete neglect and corruption. It just, I guess, what I hope to get from this conversation is to at least have someone who, maybe you don't agree with me, but at least we can reach some sort of view of reality that we can start from, right? That is the most difficult thing right now, that we're at the most challenging phase that this country has ever seen, right? This is the biggest catastrophe we've had, bigger than Yom Kippur, and our leadership is the worst it has ever been.
I don't think we're disagreeing on much. I mean, like, I could say that, like, I'll give an example. The example I'll give is, what should I do with him? I don't necessarily know. Like, again, like I could tell you, I don't disagree with you. I don't think fundamentally on, like, how we, like, sort of needing to move forward and needing to be able to work together and speak together and sort of see reality in the same way. The problem is, like, even when you mention right now, they hired the guy to deal with the so they hired Gal Hirsch, right? Like, there's a lot of nonsense people spoke about him that ended up being not true. Like, it then goes back into that narrative, which is like, is he really a problem? And are people just saying, like, or is it not a problem? And that's like, now we're just looking to hunt someone else and we're making a bigger deal out of it. And it's not, I'm trying to say, like, it happens on both sides. I just think, I'm going to use an example of, like, what happened with Gaza and the hospital. It's like you light a little fire. You have one fact that might be true that someone then runs on, and then, like, it's corrupted. And then it could have been okay if Bibi just said X, but because Bibi decides to, like, not get off his high horse and respond negatively, then that's the new headline, and that headline is correct. Like, he wasn't acting, but he's saying, but yeah, my response was because of the lie, and, like, that's already buried. So I do think, unfortunately, on both sides, there just is.
Which are the two sides at this point?
I
have no idea what both sides.
But my point being, like, when you're saying that we're, like, in the worst government right now, and so you'll be like, it's the worst government we have right now. And the way I interpret that is, what you mean is that right now there is no real leadership. The people that are involved are not knowing how to communicate between each other. They're all playing this political game that they're dealing with right now. However, what I see there is still saying what I would hope to what I'm hoping that I'm hearing is those individuals, though, they could be nice people. They could also be talented, but this thing is not working necessarily. And some of them are even corrupt. However, what I believe is pushed on the media many times is this is a bunch of gangsters that like, they want bad for you. They're evil. Like, yes, don't kill them, but like, it's horrible, horrible, horrible people. And they want nothing good for you. And once you hear that, to me, it almost becomes again like a just not Bibi. It becomes that if everything is horrible and everything is the worst thing in the world, then it's just very hard then to gauge and take an argument seriously. Having said that, there are many, 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 many serious arguments. So I'm with you that we're not seeing reality right now. And I'm with you that the people involved are, I don't even know if leadership can really make real decisions today because of social media. And this is not an excuse. This is just a reality where like, it's so difficult to move through this process today. You should be like, just make the right decision.
I want to insist a bit.
Sure.
Because, and this is the point, right? To say that these people, might be talented or, have some capabilities, there is nothing to show for that, right? And there is everything to show for the opposite. Whether they want bad for me or not, I don't know. But the best interpretation I can give is that they have somehow personally been corrupted to the point that they don't care, right? That is how it looks to me, right? And I'm not following bullshit social media. I know how to verify my news, and it happens very often. When someone says some outlandish claim that I'm the person who says check your sources and check what it actually means. But the level of just the way I interpret that is happening, right, is I think that, and that again, there's evidence for that this is a process that has been going on for several decades of appointing the worst people that would just be loyal to the powers that be, right? I don't see anyone being given a reality check. I don't see anyone's function, right? Miri Regev, as the Minister of Transportation, was not given a slap on the wrist for not starting transportation on Saturdays when there's war and soldiers need to get to their bases. The Minister of Treasury was not scolded for not creating a budget for the war, which has to happen at every, even small round of fighting or operation. They are failing at every aspect that is designated in their job.
I agree. I guess my point was more about, we'll use, let's say, the Ministry of Finance. Let's say Bezalel Smotrich, right? Before this last government, he was known even on the left as like a very professional and very capable member of Knesset. When he was that's what you have people on the left saying about him. I'm putting aside that he's fascist, his lines about the homophobes and things like that. Okay. But that's all I hear about him now, in many sense. And then
I heard that narrative from people on the right. Mainly, I didn't hear that too much.
On the right, that he's a fascist?
No, I mean that he's competent and skilled at his job.
By the way,
I don't know what they, and I don't know what they were talking about as a member of Knesset, and also the skills that you need as a member of Knesset are far less than those that you need as a minister.
Agreed, and that's why I'm telling you with all these individuals, right? I don't know about all these individuals. The people you gave examples of, Bezalel Smotrich, I think he needs to go. I don't think he's an evil person. I don't think he wants bad for you. I don't think that's just not. And you can be like,
he was insensitive enough, and uncaring enough to to be making jokes at the first, cabinet meeting during the Saturday when this started. What do you think about my English, huh? This is the level of detachment from reality. And I'm not attributing evil in terms of these people wanted those individuals to die and to be abducted and to be tortured, right? But I think that there's so much evidence that they are not fit for their job and not fit for any like relation to reality. It's
So
mind boggling.
so I'm with you. So then you find yourself in a situation like this. There's going to be another election, right? What are the people all fools? Why? Like now, Bibi says, like, listen, I have no interest. I think you and I know that he has no interest in working with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, but that's who's going to give him power, right? So that's who's going to be invited onto the ship. If you have another round of this, right? Another round of elections, is it again not Bibi? Like it's a practical matter. There's another round right now that comes up, okay? And
Well,
Bibi,
I've been supporting through Meretz. I've supporting Yair Golan, and for me, I think he both represents the departure from the just not Bibi, and he is like proven that he can walk the walk. Let's say when the war started, he drove out there and saved people's lives, right? And he's even before this, he's the politician that I felt most comfortable to support because he was saying about the Meretz internal mechanisms exactly the things that I saw with my own eyes and exactly the sort of solutions that I felt were correct for them, which is to push for the long haul, to have a long-term strategy, and to build a grassroots thing for that. And that's where my political allegiance is. In terms of what do I think the narrative is going to be,
you
I think
misunderstand me. Would you want Yair Golan to join Bibi instead of, let's say, Bibi says like, Yair Golan, you could join me, but like, or if you don't join me, I'm going to take the ultra orthodox.
at this point, I think the notion right now even of this government, Bibi running just this war is unbearable.
Agreed.
And
Well,
this isn't
remove
even
the
about
war.
just not Bibi.
So,
This is about like the point where like the basic elements of sanity need to be kept, and I think that's where the anyone but Bibi camp, and I think the same with Trump, has failed, right? There is a point that needs to be made for sanity, right? Like the making it political in the sense that it's whatever except for this person because it's a disaster. Yes, I think it comes from a much bigger issue in terms of let's say the mindset of people and social media and all of those things. But there's just a strategic element to that. Like this is, if you're not selling anything positive, and I don't know a lot about American politics, but when I saw the 2016 election where Trump won, from all I could understand, Hillary Clinton's strategy was let's not say anything that has any meaning at all because then people won't have anything to pin on me or something. Like that is a terrible idea for any, like, even if you were just cynically trying to win an election, right? So yeah, I think the goal is towards what are you going, and the question of whether you would be in a government with Bibi or not depends on where you're going. And I don't think,
putting the war aside, what do you think the 2.3 million voters, right? Why are they voting for him? And you know what? can you even imagine? Put yourself, remove the ultra orthodox as well. What are secular right wingers? Why are they voting for him? What do they want?
Okay, I'm going out of my depth here, but I can say from conversations I've had with these people and these people, like people I know that happen to vote for him, these people, and my intuition, there's a lot of identity politics similar to what's going on in the U.S. and Canada and stuff like that, in the sense that the narrative, and again, there's a really interesting book called Spin Dictators, which describes populist leaders and how they come to power. So this notion that you can rally people around saying, oh, you know why things are not good for you? You can blame that on the elites. You can blame that on the left. You can blame. Now, that has been Bibi's strategy, and I don't think it was even intentional. I think like it was, and I think it's the case for populists in general. Like you try whatever works, and if you're willing to go to any lengths, you're going to find that, right? So I do think that Natanashir was correct, right? The thing that drove and that drives still those that are still in his camp to vote for him was animosity and hate. Like the elites are taking what's rightfully theirs, that the kibbutz people and the Ashkenazi people and all of the discrimination that was here at the beginning of country, all of these things, they're to blame for their misfortune, and that's why they have to kick them out with their representative, right? The person who would prove that, and you can see that by the members of Knesset in the Likud, the people. Like they manifest that, like Miri Regev, Dudi Amsalem,
not all, but definitely the vocal ones, right? Like I don't think like Yuli Edelstein and Yariv Levin and Nir Barkat, I don't think that's like their jam. As far as like,
I think some people like Nir Barkat and Avi Dichter look like they're fish out of water in the Likud gatherings, right? And I still think they are absolutely culpable, and I have no idea how they can, go on for all this time, through the judicial overhaul and everything. Those are the people that I look at and say, like, how can they be a part of this and be okay with it, given their background and their, the people in their lives? But yeah, if you're asking me why so many people voted for Bibi, I think it's this. And I think they won't vote for Bibi again because the fracture in the sense of security, which is what he was trying to sell, that has come from a range of failures, but at least a large part of that was a policy to prop up Hamas on account, more than Abu Mazen and the authorities in the West Bank, which he, this is not conspiracy. It's their declared policy.
By the way, that was a fail. I don't know if that. I mean, that was not as controversial as it was back then. Like it could have been like with the data you were looking at the time. First of all, again, he needs to go, and it was a fail. I don't know if in whatever that is in 2005 or 2008 when he decides to move on this, it's like, oh, this is crazy what you're doing. It could have been that it made sense at that time to do that.
Well, I look at Amud Anan, for instance, right? Much later than 2005, Hamas shoots, I think, 2,000 rockets at the southern settlements in like 48 hours. And in response, we're like, let's negotiate. That seems like a good idea, right? Like, I mean, as a policy throughout all of these years, it was, okay, violence gives concessions. You want to get stuff from Israel? Great, shoot at us.
Okay, but that first of all, I mean, ironically, even though the right comes out saying that they're like more hawkish, ultimately, like they've given up a lot of land and they've done a lot of concessions on the left, on the right. However, like, like what do you think that the war on Thursday, was this a dream shattering for people on the left?
In what sense do you mean? Like the dream of peace?
Yeah.
The dream of...
Because you have to ask yourself, again, if you're being very generous, right? Like take all the West Wing, take the West Bank, take Jerusalem. What do you do if after that peace deal, it still doesn't stop?
Well, first of all, the idea of land for peace, right? A lot of the things that are attributed to the left, like the sort of naivete that people are trying to pin on the left, I think is not historically accurate, right? It's not what the left was about. And I know that you have criticism about Oslo, and I think a lot of people, even on the left, have a lot of criticism about Oslo. There are a lot of good parts about it too, and I think that is evidenced by the fact that we had plenty of opportunities to exit, like the Oslo Accords, and to do different things, right? And definitely to promote other agreements, but we haven't. And
I mean, we've made peace offers. Generous.
We've made peace offers. We've made peace offers, and again,
we disengaged.
We disengaged from Gaza.
Yep.
Right. Disengaging from Gaza, I think the fact, and this is, this was said at the time, and this is definitely by the left, right? Ariel Sharon was the one who disengaged from Gaza, and while I think it was critical because of the immense cost and how unsustainable it was, doing that unilaterally, without any sort of longer term plan, I think was detrimental. It weakened the Palestinian Authority. If the dream for peace was we move out where the terrorists strike hardest, and we give them control over more land as a terror organization, and we let them get money and funding for their terror organization, we know is going to that terror organization because they're still having refugee camps there and they're not getting humanitarian, then yeah, that dream is dead. But that wasn't the dream. And there was, like, the governments that were in power were not promoting anything close to peace. They were, despite, the offers that were being made, I don't see anything that was, that genuinely had the potential to give long-term improvement in the situation. On the contrary, where the security coordination in the West Bank had given us, not zero attacks at us, but the most quiet that we have ever had from the West Bank with under Abu Mazen, and we turn a cold shoulder to that.
Well, obviously, you could say it was misguided, but there's a tactical reason for that, obviously, right?
Yeah, like I'm saying that dream has to die, and I hope it will. The tactic that says we don't believe that any peace could be made with this.
With that group.
Okay. Yeah, with the moderates, let's say. We don't believe that the moderates are actually moderate, and instead will support the extremists because that would, thwart the legitimacy that the moderates would have, because probably the moderates are just, they're lying, and all they want is just a chance to get back at us and murder us. But yeah, that dream is dead. I think if we think about how can we move forward, and this is not about land for peace, but this is about any way to move forward. Like, Israel does need to make decisions, which, under all of Netanyahu's government, he has done everything in his power to not make decisions whenever he could. And the decision, that is most critical is the 1967 Palestinians. Do we annex them or do we separate from them? right? You can't really, unbind yourself from that decision, and stalling, a decision that has to be made costs you resources, costs you lives, costs you, so many things. You have to, and I'm not saying again that the tactical and strategical and policy issues would need to be like, oh, let's do it now, just withdraw from everywhere and believe that peace will come. But yeah, there should be a road plan. There should be.
No, but you could say, okay, so arguably you could say the road plan that, again, Bibi was pushing was the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia. I'm doing this. I'm doing peace, and I'm creating pressure from the outside. It's not the dumbest idea in the world, and seemingly he was successful with the Abraham Accords, and seemingly he was going to be successful with the Saudi deal, which I still think is potentially on the table, and it'd be a very big mistake if we let it slip between our fingers. Obviously, if it depends on the outcome of this war right now and how this goes about, like to see like what the ramifications are going to be. But let's pretend you're the man in charge, right? I wanna play out like an experiment here for a second. So like, what's the move you do? How do you bring upon this peace?
How do I bring upon this peace?
It's your moves right now. You're saying, forget the extremists. I'm going to speak to the people I have a partnership with. Okay. And I guess ultimately, and this also relates to Gaza, where again, I preface this because in today's climate, like you have to, but like Arabs are my cousins and I can't wait to live in peace with them. Okay. I have no ill will towards any Arabs. Do you think that the unfortunate indoctrination that many, definitely Gazans and some Palestinians go through, do you think that we could surpass that? That's surmountable for us. And by that, I mean, you have some sort of peace deal that people agree with, and they all look like rational parties. Okay. And then guess what? It blows up in your face. Okay. It doesn't work out. It would be horrible. Obviously, it doesn't work out. Even at that point, what is Israel supposed to do? Because right now you're in a situation like in Gaza where like, and I also blame social media on this, like it's no longer the 40s. People are giving examples of like Dresden and things like that. Like it's in the whole wide world. We're all in this stalemate of like, we don't know how to act because we are constantly viewing our actions in front of us on a screen. And I'm looking at a number of babies going up. It's like 65 babies, 72 babies. So how is Israel supposed to defend itself when like even with a clear aggressor, it's very, very complicated. If you annex people that end up, unfortunately, in this scenario I'm giving, like the worst case scenario, end up becoming enemies, what are you doing then? Because even if they're all attacking you, it's the world still wouldn't agree for you to like now bomb them like crazy. It would still be like, no, like it's still too intense. So like, what is reasonable for you? And when I say like, I'll give up land, take the Temple Mount, all these things, I just don't want any death. But if that can't be promised, is that too intense for me as a condition? No more death.
I don't think I disagree with you, right? Like that's all I'm asking for, right? I want a practical solution, and I don't care, right? A practical solution that is not naive, right? That is not something that you'd say, oh, I'm willing to give that up because I'm, such a believer in peace. And if we just act morally, then everyone would see it and no one would have any ill will towards us. Like that's not the world we live in. I'm with you on that. Right. I think.
Right, so I'm saying then, like,
I think that Israel needs to. If you're asking what I think should be done, right? You want to have your fortress, like if I'm talking analogously, you want to have your fortress closed off to an invasion, but open to a diplomat, right? You want to create the conditions where things can become better, right? How do you do that specifically? There are some moves that I can say, would help, like not having maniacs that burn down a house with an Arab family inside it, right?
But
Like,
I have to push back
or
on that. How rare is that in the Jewish community?
rare,
Are you so it's
very
not
rare.
it doesn't even make sense to bring up Jewish terrorism because it's such a small minority and
Okay, Jewish.
everyone in society
Let me just make a correction on that. Like, if you're talking about how rare is it that Jews would burn down a house with a family in it, that's rare. If you're talking about how many clashes there are between settlers and Palestinians in the West Bank by the Noag Va'ot, the extremists of the settlers, there are a lot of them. And
a minority with regards to that. No one in the Israeli society almost no one is pro that. No one is pro violence towards Arabs.
No one is. But Israel is, in this case, not doing enough to prevent it. I remember the case where there was one of the Noag Va'ot who was chased down by I think Shin Bet and flipped over his car, and he died while escaping the police. And the outrage, the outcry at why were they even chasing him? How dare they? Right? The fact that we deal with these people with kid gloves, and this is a political issue, right? Politics is all the way in there, right? And again, I don't even like this. Might be a bit too much, and it's getting quite late in order to bridge.
Yeah.
But I do think there are ways in which the conflict, when you not naively, not in a way that you're allowing yourself to be more vulnerable, but if your interest is as little deaths as possible, I think there are things we can do to build trust. And building trust has to be reciprocal. It has to be, it's not just you give something and then the other person just continues being violent towards you at the same amount or even more, and then you give them more. But conflicts over territories like we have with the West Bank specifically, and this is not the same with Hamas. On their charter, believe that they should just kill all the Jews and that there should be no Jews in Israel. Yeah. Conflicts over territory have happened throughout history, and they've been bloody and they've been resolved, and we can take examples from the way they've been resolved. One thing that wasn't present there was that constant settlement in more and more areas of the conflicted area. Right? And I know that this is how Israel was formed. Right? This isn't such a new thing. But we have to change that outlook. We have to.
I mean, I'm with you. The reason I guess I'm a little despair. I feel a little despair is because, so for example, in my youngest daughter's kindergarten, they fired one of she goes to this kindergarten where some of the staff is Arab staff. So they fired one of them because she was pro-Hamas. So I don't know of and this is a problem. And obviously, this is not indicative of Arabs for sure, and not all Palestinians specifically. Unfortunately, though, it is naive of me to assume it's a non-issue.
And it's an issue.
So that's so it's I have to think. My son is going to go back. Well, forget my son's example, but there aren't groups. You don't have an Arab kindergarten. We don't have a dynamic like this, anyways. But the employer that has the Arab contractors that work for me in my company, they are not for 1 second thinking Chazi might just want to kill me. But I know for sure that there's some over there that if push comes to shove, it's not a problem. I'm gone. They're throwing me off the roof. And that is a dynamic which is it's very hard to you said I don't want to be naive. Those conditions, not only do they make me not naive, it just makes it almost impossible to think of things that allow us to move forward.
I'm not sure how that relates to. So
it relates to when you say like there are moves. Like, I'm trying to think like practically, and that's why I gave like after Shomer Chomot, I brought like a lot of Arab workers in the office, and I wanted to talk to them, and I gave them that example where I said, take the old city and take the West Bank. It's all yours. What I want is, can I now go with my son to the Temple Mount just to pray? And they're like, no. And I'm like, so it's not going to work. You understand that? Like, after I gave you all this stuff, I just want to go there as a tourist. And your answer is no. But that's also the fact that Muslims, non-Muslims can't go into Medina because they're like, no, that's not the game. So are you ultimately going to push up against an ideology that has not reformed, like Christianity and Judaism has over the years? And I don't know how long you could, like, we could use modern terminology, but if you're still dealing with a ideology that's ancient, how are you going to do that?
I mean, that's a whole different question, and I think there's really interesting data, right? So a lot of I've seen polling data from someone who's been polling Arab society in Israel for decades, so he knows how to poll them in a way that is much less biased. And this event has shaken Arab society in Israel. There's an example of Nusayr Yassin, who's an influencer online. He has some company or something. I don't really know him, but he made a tweet. His account is Nas Daily.
Yeah, I know that. He said, "I'm now," right? He said, "I'm now Israeli Palestinian."
Yeah. And there were some other examples of that, and there's certainly evidence in the data from the poll, right, where it seems to be a sort of dawning realization. One of the things he says there, which I think is relevant for Israeli Arabs in general, is like the realization that Israel is the country that you need to continue to exist in order for yourself to be able to continue to exist. And Palestine, whatever it might be, is not a place for them. And, so you can think about your contractors, and I agree with, like that terrible, terrible sentiment, and it's not something to live with. But there's also, when you go to a pharmacy or to a hospital in Israel, Arabs are massively overrepresented, and none of them, I'm quite sure, right? Like, these are people that dedicate their lives to saving anyone that they can. When push comes to shove, and it has, right? These are people that have their allegiance with saving lives, right? And it's, it's also something to consider when you think about internally, how do you deal with this problem? Then you want to do what you can to strengthen that force, right? To take the people that you can see are actually your allies, and they're your allies when push comes to shove, and to give them, to reward them for that, to give them all of the, credit and appreciation and power that you can give. And again, this is not something that you can think about in terms of, now, a year, or even 10 years. But if you're thinking about 50 years from now, if you're thinking about a program that you're going towards 50 years from now, gradually, I'm not that pessimistic about it. I don't think it's so out of this world that animosity could tone down to a level that is acceptable, that you can live, let's say, at levels of violence that are similar to other Western countries, right? That it's not constant fear of massive violent outbreaks like intifadas and things like that.
We, like you said, it's kind of late. I think we'll end on this on a brighter note, that there was during COVID, obviously there was a lot of issues with people getting into hospitals and flying. So there was this Jewish patient that was very sick, and he realized that his family was not going to make it. He was dying, and he was alone. And the Arab nurse, I think, came to him and said, your family's not going to make it. And he said, "Do you want me to say the Shema with you?" As the guy was dying, and then he said it together with him. And then the country gave him like to light the the candle, the flame, the torch on the Independence Day, right? So that would be an example of like you have this beautiful moment, and it's being elevated obviously by the country, being championed by the country as well. I hope we could find more and more of those moments. I hope we could elevate more and more of those moments. Again, for me as religiously, it's sad because ultimately we believe in the same God. So it's a very, very very difficult battle. But I think this is also Israel's. I think it's fitting that we need to be dealing with this tension of the land and the people and the foreigner on it. I think that's like the next chapter. And like, if we don't know how to solve that, then we don't deserve it yet. And if we know how to solve it, then we can show that we're worthy of doing so. And I think also the world's all looking at us right now, even with Gaza, and like, it's very difficult. Like, I think the world wants to see evil punished. And on the other hand, like, we need to figure out how to do so in the most enlightening way and not by like possible. But I don't know, maybe I'm putting too much pressure on us as a people, but I want
to. But I think that I agree that that's where it's at, right? It's certainly what I think people are concerned with, right? In in the largest scales, and I see, with all of the anger and pain and the need to, for every practical reason, there has to be a proper response to this, right? For the safety of the people here, you can't. And I think still, despite all of that, people are deeply concerned with how do you do that without corrupting, your own humanity, without causing unnecessary harm. I think that's the real question that people are contending with, and it's not a simple or straightforward like follow this rule and you got it, right? It's a very complicated thing, but
I bless us that we'll find that our leaders will have the wisdom and the courage to make the right decisions, whether it doesn't matter which political party they're in. I just hope they have the wisdom to make the right decisions and the courage to make the right decisions. And please God, we will find a balanced understanding and reading of reality that we could once again share. Hopefully it won't get worse before it gets better. But I appreciate you taking the time.
You too.
And I'll catch you on the flip. Take care, buddy.
All right.
And to all you that are joining or watching, thank you. I know this was like very specific to Israel. Hope you guys got to learn something, or at the very least, see two people engage, which I believe we're in different sides of the political aisle. However, I think it was a demonstration of a not heated conversation where we're trying to see each other and understand each other. I'm glad that he clarified some points that let me understand where he was coming from a little better, which is always important. Complicated world we live in. We need to think long and hard how we want to steward and what our expectations are from ourselves. Have all of you have a great day, and we'll be in touch. Or is that who Shlief is? Oh, I see you wrote over here who's Shlief. His name's Gilad. He's Israeli. He's a physicist. He is a musician, and that's what he's doing. Catch you guys later.